When I say that jelly printing is a gift, I mean it. I got a gift in the mail. This is from my friend Kim at Seeds of Kindness, and she gifted me these paints that she said she isn't using, and she said she wanted to spread the seed of kindness over to me, and I will gladly use these. And that's what today's jelly printing is going to be, is using the supplies that she gifted me. So thank you, Kim, so much for your wonderful and inspiring gift that prompted this video. All of these colors are actually my favorite colors. I would have picked each and every one of these, so I love the choice of colors here. And I really like that she wrote on them either at the top or on the sides. That makes it really easy, because when you look for the name in the bottom, it's kind of hard to find it sometimes, and it's in a couple of different languages, so you have to figure out which one's English. So I really appreciate that on these, that she wrote that down. So these are a variety of Liquitex. Most of them are Amsterdam, and a few are Royal Langnickel. And then she's got some wet tissue, which I've really wanted to try this. I think it's the Carnival Wet Strength. She has some old embossing folders, I think one that fell apart, and then some textures that she included. This looks like from a coffee sleeve, and then in this bag she's got a few more textures. It looks like just one side of an embossing folder, which it can be used again and again, and then all of these embossed cardstock pieces from embossing folders that she has. I love the flower one. So these are going to make wonderful textures on a jelly plate, and of course she even included some bubble wrap. I love that she used some of them too. That makes me happy that she actually got to use some of these. So I kept pulling out paint colors, which was awesome. And then she gave me the most amazing gift, was this 9x12 jelly plate. I only have an 8x10 as my largest size. This one looks like it's from Joggles, and I can't wait to use that. And here are all the paint colors that I was gifted. It's got every color category covered. Even a metallic, which is the pearl. So with these colors, that's what I'm going to use primarily in my video today, and I am going to use the wet tissue. Some of the pieces were pre-cut down. I think she had pre-cut them, and then some of them were longer sheets. So I'm using my Fiskars. I think this is supposed to be for cutting fabric, and I instead use it to cut my longer pieces of paper for crafting. Although I could see the lines through the tissue paper, I still use this straight edge ruler that I got from Dollar Tree, and it's made out of metal, just to hold the paper kind of still as I was cutting. So I'm going to pull out my large 9x12 gel plate that Kim gave me. I have to put this one on my glass mat because it won't fit on my smaller mat that I use for my other two sizes, which this is fine. I'm glad it fits on here. And I can use this line to kind of make it straight on the glass mat. And then I can use my smaller little glass mat here for my 5x7 gel plate. And I'm going to use that kind of like a brayer area to mix my paints and make them blend together on there before I bring them over to the large plate. So being that I have not worked on a plate this large before, I just went ahead and started with a stencil from PM Artist Studio. This design is the Suspicious Sprouts by Rhonda Donna. And Kim had also sent me some inspiration videos, and one of them was an artist who had used some gold leafing on her jelly plate. She had taken larger sheets and filled the entire jelly plate with the gold sheets and then cracked them. I'll link the video, and then I think her name is Karen. And then she went ahead and applied it to paper and had a really nice shine on her paper. I decided to try a stencil to see if I could get the gold leaf to kind of only be in between those areas of the stencil pieces. I was trying to get a shape out of the gold leaf. But what I was noticing is the gold leaf didn't really separate itself. I was trying to rub it so that it would only stick to the gel plate. And up here on this one, I kind of tried to remove it from the stencil area. As I pulled it off, the parts just kept kind of sticking themselves back onto the plate, and they didn't really create the design that I had from the stencil. But it's okay because I was just kind of going for little parts here and there that have the gold leaf on it, and I didn't really want the entire thing covered, mostly because I just don't have that much gold leaf. I did try cracking it, so I lifted up the gel plate, curled it, cracked it, bent it, and I did get some crackling to form. I'm going to start with a Naples yellow here on my smaller gel plate. I'm going to blend that in with some primary yellow. I'm trying to keep an ombre to them, so there's still two separate colors, but they're kind of mixed in the middle. As I was watching Karen Tamir's video about her adding the gold foil to her jelly plate, she had referenced Shauna from Created and Made, her channel, so I checked out her channel with the video using the gold leafing, and Shauna had recommended brayering onto a second piece of paper, a second gel plate, and then using a paper over that, pulling it right away, and while the paint was still wet, coming over to the gold leaf and then pulling up the gold leaf on that paper. So I thought I'd try something just a little bit different. Instead, I brayered onto my second gel plate, took my gel plate, pressed it down onto the gold leaf to try to transfer the paint without brayering it too much. But I will say some of the gold leafing still came off on my second jelly plate. So, and the transfer wasn't perfectly smooth. It had some, bubbles in it because it was coming from a gel plate onto a gel plate. So I don't know if this is the best technique, but I will say that some of the gold leafing did remain on the gel plate. I mixed in a little bit of magenta with my Naples yellow, and at first I was going to brayer it onto my plate, but I realized I still didn't have all of the gold leaf covered, so I just covered that last area of gold leafing. This is kind of like block printing, where I'm getting blocks of color. And I was just trying to fill in some of that large gel plate background. I started making a mess, of course, but that's part of the fun. Now, one thing Karen was saying in her video is that you do have to take some time to play with the gold leaf because everybody's results come out different, even from one person who learned something, passing it along to someone else, myself included. So this was the only print that I did with the gold leafing. I've done gold leafing before on my jelly plate and it's been okay, but I've always had the issue where some of it comes up onto my brayer, doesn't always stay. So that, I thought Shauna's idea was really a good idea, to put kind of like a decent amount of paint on a separate plate and move it over. That would have been good if I used 2 of my 5x7 gel plates. Then I probably would have tried that. So I may try that in the future and see what kind of results I get. So these are some of the textures that Kim had gifted me. This one, actually, I took the old embossing folder that was split into 2, and I was still able to use it and emboss a piece of cardstock. And I really do love the one that looks like kind of like waves, or kind of like oceany, swirly, I don't know, lines. It just reminds me of ocean waves. I love that one. This one has a textured flower in the center, so I was just trying to get that flower in different areas. Over here on my smaller jelly plate, I'm just using this one embossing folder over the top of it. And while the paint is still wet, I'll go in with a book page. I don't end up letting this dry on the jelly plate, I just pulled it right off. But I like the colors. This copper, this is actually my own copper, but it's from Amsterdam. So I thought it went nicely with the colors that Kim had given me. So I brayered that out, and then I took this smaller brayer that I had ruined by trying to scrape off some of my layers of paint, and I ended up making dots, and then I did it on purpose all the way around, and it kind of created this fun little texture. So I kept it so that I could do things like this, brayer it, and kind of get some holy looking areas. This works out well for a metallic if you don't want a full covering of metallic paint. While the metallic was still wet on my smaller gel plate, I used this wood grain texture and just pulled some of that to reveal a little of the gel plate. And then I took the print that I had just printed on there with the book page, and I just layered that copper right on top. And again, I didn't let it dry, I just kind of pressed it down and then quickly removed it just to catch whatever I could. I love using contrasting colors on my prints, so the first layer had the warmer colors, the yellows, the oranges, and the pink. So on the top of that, or behind it, I wanted to come in with my cooler colors, the light blue, the dark blue, and the green. I do still have that gold leaf underneath that first layer of paint, but I did notice on this second layer that some of the gold leaf was still pulling up in little areas here and there. So again, gold leaf is kind of tricky when you're trying to layer paint on top of it. I did go in with some textures on this layer. And the color I wanted to use to pull this print is this violet. This is a pearl violet. I'm still trying to figure out how much paint I need on this larger gel print size. So I just put a decent amount down, and I'm using my 8-inch brayer. And this time I'm using a shiny side down tissue paper that I had cut down. This is the wet tissue that Kim gifted me. So the difference between this wet tissue and the tissue paper I have already on hand is my tissue paper is from Dollar Tree and it can rip pretty easily. Knowing how my tissue paper worked, I didn't want to let this sit on the plate too long. I used a hairdryer and I started to peel it up, and I didn't leave it on long enough. So I let it dry for about 4 more minutes, a total of 5 minutes. But I had already kind of lifted it, and in that area, some of it did not pull up, but I just decided to keep pulling on it. I also decided that whether it all pulled up or not, I was going to use the pieces left on the plate as a starter to my next print. I know you could come in with a clear coat of gel medium or something and pull the rest of it up, but I actually kind of liked the white spaces. I thought it looked kind of cool, and I really liked the idea that I could pull some of that color from that first print into my next print. So then I'm going in with my warm colors. I really like the warm colors mixed together. Instead of using my small gel plate this time, I'm just putting the paint onto the gel plate, and then I'll blend them in with my 6-inch brayer. And I do have some copper, and that's copper instead of orange that I put down. So I've got the primary yellow, the Naples yellow, the copper, and the magenta. And again, still figuring out how much paint I need. I did probably put a little bit too much, but that's part of the learning process. I love that this plate is nice and clear. Mine have become yellowed because I use alcohol inks on mine. And my larger plate, I purposely haven't used alcohol inks, but just the use of all my paints and pearls and everything over the years, it's a little more cloudy. So this one was really nice that it was very clear. I just absolutely love this floral embossed page that Kim gave me. It's very large. I don't know, I didn't measure the size of it, but it seems it's almost like 7 inches long, and it was able to get a lot of an impression on this large gel plate. I thought this texture looked really neat. It's the corrugated cardboard from a sleeve, but it's where they crossed and connected. And so parts of the corrugation were going one way and parts were going another way. So I just kind of tapped it down in areas where the paint was a little bit thicker, or the design of the flowers were kind of full of color, so that I could remove some of that color. Now I did let this layer dry completely before going in with my next layer. Again, I liked having the pops of the contrasting color, so I came back in with the light blue, the green, and the darker blue. When you do the blobs of paint on the plate like this, the longer they sit on the plate, I notice that they become like a circle when you roll them out, and it sometimes maintains that circle shape on the gel plate, or the impression is still that kind of like that initial circle, but it turns into an oval as you smear it, which you can kind of see where that green is and where the blue is. So that was part of why I had started using my second jelly plate. But the one thing I notice is when I use my second jelly plate, I can't really blend and mix my colors together on this larger jelly plate when I have my colors separate on a separate one. So it was just an experiment for me, kind of figuring out back and forth which one I liked and preferred. Going back to that very first print, the one that had the kind of blocks of the smaller gel plate on it, I wanted to kind of conceal that a little bit. So what I did is I used this foam stamp. This is from PM Artist Studio. The designer for this stamp is Christy Hartman, and I love this. It's a rose, but I think it can be used as any kind of flower. It kind of looks like a poppy. It kind of looks like a, I don't know, a couple of different flowers that it could be depending on what color. But I just love the outline of it. It's a very delicate looking petal and the centers. So I just used that to kind of cover the background with some black and gray. And then I added another impression layer to my smaller gel plate, and then just pulled this onto another sheet of my book page. The book page is quite perfect for the 5x7 gel plate. So coming back to the print that was drying during that time, I let this one dry for about 10 minutes. And again, being that it's the wet strength tissue paper, it came up just fine. If I had let my Dollar Tree tissue paper dry that long, I believe it would have probably stuck in some areas. So this is definitely a much higher quality tissue paper. I do love the pops of color, but you can see what I was talking about where you have some of the brayered out color that smears, like the circle that smears into an oval, and they're quite prevalent on this print in particular. So it's just another part of Gelli printing and figuring that piece out. Sometimes won't even notice it if you end up turning it into a mixed media piece where you're covering a lot of it. And then other times you can use stamping and stenciling over the top to kind of mask those areas or make them blend in better. I'm going back in with my suspicious sprouts. I had added some of my cooler colors, the magenta, the purple color, and the blue. In my last video discovering Gelli printing, I had a great comment, and this was from Serendipity Ward, and she wrote that she especially loved starting with a dark thin layer of paint across the plate, then the stencil, pulling all the bits in the open area and just leaving behind the thin edges of the outlined shapes, and then building the layer and texture on top of that. So this was my first attempt at doing that, but I realized I didn't do the paint on the gel plate. I had done the paint over the stencil, and I didn't get a clear outline of the stencil design. There was still kind of color in between. I think I could have gotten rid of more of it if I had used 2 pieces of tissue paper while the paint was still wet, and I could have removed a little bit more. But I'm just going to go with it, and coming in here I've got some copper, and I'm just going to put a light layer of the copper in this area. This one turned out pretty cool. I didn't let it dry all the way either, and it left some of it behind on the gel plate, but I really like just pulling up pieces, and then I can tear those book pages up and use parts of them. Now, because I didn't like the blobs of paint and what that was doing on the gel plate, I did kind of combine 2 colors here, my 2 blue colors, and I'm just gonna start kind of blocking in some colors, adding my texture, and then bringing in other colors. This is actually a paper die cut doily that I have. I cut it in half for a different project I had used it for, and this was the leftover part. I'm using my 2-inch brayer to press it down just enough. I'm not getting full impressions, I'm just wanting to get a few of the areas. This is a Dollar Tree doily that I cut the center out of, and I just have kind of like the frame part of it here. So these paints, if you look at the outside of them, it tells you whether they're transparent or opaque. Most of them are opaque, and some of them are semi-opaque or semi-transparent. And I do find they have really good coverage. It's a thicker based paint versus the golden fluid acrylics that I've been working with a lot. And that too gives me just another layer of kind of working with these paints versus working with the golden paints. These are very easy to work with, and they layer colors on top of each other really nice because of the opacity. So I am enjoying that. This print I decided to use my Hammer Mill 32-pound copy paper instead of the tissue paper. I did use a piece of tissue paper just to pull the excess around it. This book page now had quite a few layers built up on it, and I did let it dry. So this one you're not going to see, well, I'm not going to see much of the text through this print. But I do like the orange in the background and then the blue and the purple on the foreground. It looks really nice and the design is quite interesting. To get my print off, I just kind of had to pull at a corner. Now I will say some of the paint on the gel plate kind of stuck in some areas and came off, making it look like a jagged edge, and like at the top there's just a piece of paint hanging. But I really do like that I have a full 8.5 by 11 piece of paper completely covered in my paint. And this is a beautiful print. I definitely like the light blue in this one. The reds and the orange kind of are overtaking the bottom part, so I'll do something with that later on and I'll show you what I do there. But I really do like having this full sheet because I like to make envelopes, and I think this will be a great way for me to make an envelope with a full sheet of paper. Now I'm going in and using Serendipity's suggestion and putting the paint on the gel plate first, the dark color, so that's black. Now I did put my stencil down. This is Eddie's Flores Geometricas, and then I kind of brayered my leftover paint over the top of it so it would be lighter in the center. Then I came in with my tissue paper and removed a lot of that paint in the centers of these flowers. You have to be careful with tissue paper over a stencil because if you let that dry, it will stick. I really like the black and white of these flowers, so I'll probably just keep those as is. I didn't like how the black around the border of the stencil was kind of blotchy, so I took my 2-inch brayer and I just started kind of brayering out that paint. It was still wet in some areas, so in some areas it blended and in other areas it just kind of removed it, but I just didn't want it to be blotchy looking. So once that layer dried, then I came in, instead of using my gel plate this time, I used just my brayer off paper, and I just brayered some colors together and used that instead. Now over here with my pinks, I did brayer directly onto the gel plate, and they kind of made a purple color when I mixed it with the blues, which I really love that color. Just going through the same steps here that I've been doing. The only difference is on this print, I did the black paint first, then I did the stencil, removed the extra paint, then I came in and now I'm doing all my layers on top, just like Serendipity had recommended, or how she shared that she enjoys doing it. And I really am loving the process of this print. I think it's going to be my favorite print. And then of course I love my perfect pearl powders, and the fact that there were these really delicate flower areas. I decided to use my pearl in some of those areas just to capture shininess on the final print. The white paint that Kim gifted me is called Blockout white paint, and it's very opaque. It does a great job covering up this background with all of the colors and all of the layers. So I'm really enjoying this paint. I do let this print dry for about 10 minutes. I walk away from it and then come back later just so that it can dry completely. I do notice that the tissue paper leaves crinkles behind. I don't have a Baron, but I used my hands and tried to smooth it out the best that I could to try to omit those wrinkles, but inadvertently there are still some wrinkles left. I think if I put a heavy book on top of it or something, layered stuff on top, I think that would probably solve that. I do feel like I left it on long enough, and I love the colors of this one. That black, just like Serendipity said, it just gives this really nice pop in the beginning of the print, and I just love how it kind of fades off into the background once you get to the center, and then those perfect pearl patterns really pop through. I just love the colors, how they mix together on this one. It's just beautiful. One of my favorites. I think that is my favorite actually from this session. And then over here I brought some of my cooler colors back in, but I did bring yellow in with my green and blue, the light blue, and I'm just kind of spraying these colors out first. And then I wanted to bring in pops of reds and pinks. It'll end up being the magenta, so it won't be red, but I wanted to bring in the warmer colors behind this print because I knew that that would be such a nice contrast with this green and blue background. I do put my paint on the jelly plate. My thought process is that since this is behind the first layer, I'm hoping that the paint blobs will look more blended since it's in the background. Just trying to get all of my wrinkles out of this jelly print. While that's drying, I'm going to come in with the hammer mill, 32-pound hammer mill piece that I had gel printed with. And I have this, it's called Peculiar Pebbles stamp, another foam stamp from Pam Artist Studio. I put some blue for the pebbles, and then this is a leaf, or could be like a floral kind of a stamp from Christy Hartman again. And if you kind of stamp them in a circle, it kind of looks like a flower. So I just did that to bring in some of the blues and greens down in that area where I felt like it was missing. So now I have this print that dried, and I love how the colors are really kind of vibrant on this one. They are kind of fall-like colors, but I think that blue in there really kind of pops, and it just reminds me of bright green spring colors with the reds and the pink flowers that you see in spring. The orange does kind of bring in that fall feel, but I think it's also a spring feel, so I love how that one turned out. Now for this next one, I had one of my prints that had a lot of color on it, and I wanted to tone it down with a little bit of black. So that's what I'm doing here, is I'm just removing some of the black to create a pattern. And then while the paint is still wet, I'll put that print that I had done earlier that has a lot of color in it, and I'll just try to get some black areas. To cover up those seams, I just used my drywall tape that I had taped onto the back of this piece of cardboard just to kind of make those areas blend in, and then I used it in some other areas to kind of make it cohesive. So again, trying to line this up while the paint is still wet. Can see a little bit through this paper to see where the gel plate is, so that's handy. I worked quickly and I didn't let it dry. I just wanted a little bit of the black and then just removed whatever black came up. And you can see it did pull up some black in some areas and not in other areas. But it was just enough to give it some of that black contrast in this very colorful print. Now I did have all that black paint left on the gel plate, so I went in with this is the Violet Pearl, and I just used that to kind of cover the surface of this. And I'm using it on my small gel plate as well. Coming in with this print that I had made with the purples. This one left a lot of the almost like a crackle effect, so I'll probably end up using that later on. But I do like how the black kind of ties this one together, and the purple pearl paint is very beautiful when you tilt it in the light. It looks really nice with that black as well. So these are the prints that I made with my book pages on my 5x7 gel plate. These were mostly brayer offs, and I had added some texture into them, but they weren't my main prints that I was working on. They were just kind of like a byproduct of working on the larger jelly plate, which is kind of cool because you can get kind of double the prints when you're using your smaller gel plate as a palette. This is the one that I had done on my copy paper, and the stamping that I did over the top of it. You can see it's got that copper kind of in the background there. It's one of the middle layers. And then I'll just show you all of the prints that I made on the tissue paper, starting with this really beautiful purple and blue with the black. And then this one, my favorite, with the purple, blues, pinks, and oranges, and the perfect pearls with the black on the first layer. I do love that stencil too. That's Eddie Makes Art. He designed that stencil. It's a great one. And this is the one where I came in with the stamping over the top. This is my first print. It had the gold leaf on it, and a lot of the paint didn't pull up onto this print, so I had some white areas, and I think stamping kind of tied it together a little bit. That was the stamp by Christy Hartman. And then this one, I added the black layer on the top. This is the one that had kind of like the blobs of paint. But I still just love the colors on this one. And this one would make a great torn piece for a collage when I tear this into pieces. Or even if I use it on a background and cut little parts of it out. This is going to be a great one. And then we have this one that doesn't have a lot of the dark contrast in this one, but I kind of left it like this just because, again, sometimes I like to have just pops of bold color, and I could always bring in stamping or something else later on if I decide. Or I could put it on a project and then do some stuff over the top, and there wouldn't be any need to do anything extra to this print. But I just love the colors on this one. It's beautiful. So these paints, they're so vibrant, and I'm really enjoying these. I definitely think I'll be printing with these a lot. Kim, thank you so much for supplying these and gifting them to me. I'll definitely be using them, probably all up, and then some. And then I'll probably want to get some more because I love them so much. And thank you to my viewers, commenters, Serendipity Ward, and Rhonda, Christy, and Eddie for your designs on your stamps and your stencils. I had just so much fun playing with all of these tools and supplies today, and I just love the prints that came out. So I hope you enjoyed watching, and I hope this inspires you to work with some of your layers and some of your supplies, or pull some out and look at them in a whole new way. And I will see you in the next video. Thanks for stopping by, and happy crafting, y'all.